657, verse 1 and 2, 657, and you can mark that with your ribbon. And then 2 days ago was All Saints, and so All Saints, we're going to sing 677 for all the saints. Again, we're going to sing verse 1 and verse 2 of that. So it's time. Did we start the clock up there? Good morning. Good morning. Yeah, good morning to those that are joining with us live stream. And Andrew, would you go out there and tell the people that are enjoying each other's company to come enjoy our company? And we'll start off when someone sits next to you, show them the hymn, but don't show them the verse. We'll see how they do. They can sing whatever verse they want. But actually, we're going to sing 677. We're going to start with 657, 657, 657, and we're going to sing verses 1 and 2 of 657. All right, a mighty fortress is our God. Good morning, Charlie. Before you turn the page on this, this hymn written by Martin Luther is based off of Psalm 46. And if you would like, you should go back to the discipleship hour this past weekend. We showed a video about the history behind this song, and I know a number of people found that to be very interesting. And so it's, if you remember, hymns either are directed to the Lord as praise, petition, or they are directed to one another as helping encourage one another in what is true. And this hymn is actually directed to one another. And Luther writes this hymn as almost a narrative, a story. In a way, we're kind of cutting it off right there in verse 2. It actually picks up verse 3 and verse 4. It really is a full story, but for sake of today, we're going to move on, and we're going to go to 677, and we're going to again sing verses 1 and 2. Picked verse 1 and 2 in particular as a build off of the last hymn, A Mighty Fortress. So 677 verses 1 and 2.
Who thee by faith before the world
again, before you shut it, so if the first hymn was singing to encourage one another, did you notice the pronouns? To whom is this hymn to be sung? Who's got it? The Lord, specifically, which name? Which person in the Trinity? Jesus. Jesus. And this hymn is such a beautiful hymn because, again, it gives us opportunity. You know, hymns are really sung prayers in this regard. And this is a prayer of thanksgiving. It's a prayer of praise. Have you ever wondered, you know, what's a praise? Well, thou wast their rock. Lord, you are the rock. You're the rock on which I stand. You're the rock on the benefit, for the benefit of others. And so this hymn is a beautiful hymn. I share this with you because oftentimes we sing these and we just kind of miss out on the opportunity to see that the hymns are opportunities for us to either sing to the Lord or sing about the Lord to one another and encourage each other. And I would imagine, you know, moving to Hilton has been a little bit bizarre. Did anybody have trick-or-treaters in your neighborhood? How many of you had trick-or-treaters? Okay, one. Was that you, Charlie? You stood at the door and knocked and then gave yourself sweets. No. So put them up again. I'm just kind of curious. How many of you did? So one family, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. It's just very bizarre moving here. You know, how do you know you're in a retirement community? You buy candy and then you eat it yourself. My wife has all this trick-or-treat candy, and thankfully the little Duff boys came over and they got a bit of it. But beyond that, it's like, no, I do not want that candy. Get it away from me. But trick-or-treat, the 31st, we do understand that this is a holiday that actually, you know, All Hallows Eve was set up as a celebration. It was actually Christianized because All Saints the next day. And so this is part of the time of the year. Anybody noticing it's getting darker? And so Europe had all kinds of what I would call pantheistic religions of that believe God, the spirits are here and alive, and the earth is where they roam, and at certain times of the year they are free. The proximity is much closer, and this is where all of this comes out of. And it's interesting that in the midst of all this, that Luther picked, of all days, to put these objections on the door for conversation. And so I share that with you because, again, you know, the Christian faith exists within the context of peoples, society, cultures. I was asking a number of you where you were from in childhood, and boy, you know, on 3, what place do you identify as your childhood? Just blurt it out. 1, 2, 3. Chicago. So we have all these different places. And think about Christianity, again, starting there. How did it start? Paul had not been to Rome, and he writes a letter to these Christians who were a mixture of Jews and Gentiles. And we talked about this in the opening week. His letters have a very similar pattern to other letters of that time that we have outside of biblical sources: a salutation, a body, and a conclusion. However, you know, Paul would have been a long-winded preacher. His letters are longer. We saw that than all of the letters of that time that we have. And in the body, so remember the salutation, the body, Paul follows a very consistent pattern. Theological teaching, theological teaching, theological teaching, and then turns. And the turn is practical application, practical application, practical application, based upon what he has written earlier. Why do I say this? Well, if you're reading the book of Galatians, Galatians chapter 1 and 2 are all, salutation and theology. It starts to turn a little in 3 and then, 4, 5, and 6. Well, in Romans, it's a long letter. So we are trudging through theology. And this can become cumbersome. And I appreciate that. I understand it. But my hope is we can trudge through this, because very soon we're going to start turning. And we're going to see, especially when we hit chapters 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, and 4, it's going to really turn. But for now, we're in it. And your chapter 4, is considered to be one of the critical turning chapters, especially in this conversation about Jews and Gentiles. So let's open up, if you would, to page, if you're using the Pew Bible, to page 1119. I am fortunate and blessed to be able to use a variety of notes, commentaries, and theological resources that help me. But I will tell you, your leaders, your facilitators, have some great resources in today's lesson, and I'm going to reference a couple of them. But if you will, look at the first verse, and could you read the first verse? It's found on page 1115 of chapter 4, verse 1. Let's read it together out loud. What then shall we say was gained by Abraham, our forefather, according to the flesh? Now, it's important to notice that he has been building an argument. Last week we noticed how chapter 3, he picks up themes that he had not addressed way back in chapter 1, in verse 16 and 17. Remember, faith and righteousness, justified, all that re-enters in chapter 3. And so then he comes into chapter 3 talking about this other path to righteousness. And we hit on this last week. And I've heard a little bit, these good conversations you're having in your groups. There's going to be a couple of things said today that are probably going to need to be unpacked for you and for you to process them. And so I'm going to ask you in anticipation, don't answer this out loud. It's rhetorical, but who is someone who has claimed to be a Christian that you don't think deserves to be in heaven, and you're not sure if you're buying it? Now, I'll give you one. Are you aware that before Jeffrey Dahmer was beaten to death in the prison, he had become a very regular Bible study attender? He met with his pastor weekly. Jeffrey Dahmer. Do we all know who Jeffrey Dahmer is? I'd just soon not go through all of that. So, Jeffrey Dahmer's in heaven? So, how many of us say yes? How many of us say no? How many of us say maybe? Now, I only tell you this because I can't evaluate Jeffrey Dahmer's heart. But I can tell you this much. When I asked you who comes to mind, whatever person came to your mind is probably a good spot for you to start thinking about. And if you came to mind, then you're thinking like Paul. I ask the question, who doesn't deserve to be in heaven? Who of people you know do you think shouldn't be there? And I'm not going to ask you if you thought of yourself, but Paul is coming straight at you and me. And he is going to challenge our very thinking today. So when he says, what then shall we say was gained by Abraham, our forefather? Just a couple of things. This is the only time in the New Testament that the word forefather is used. It's not used anywhere else. And interestingly, he uses the pronoun our. And by the end of it, do you realize he's not talking about people who have Jewish blood? He actually, if you look, then toward the end of it, he starts to open it up and and share with us. I think it's, anybody find this? That it's, let's see, let's go all the way down here to the end of it. Where did I put my notes on this? Anybody has it here? I'll have to find it here. Look at your here. What tells you that this is not just for Abraham? So 18, look at 18. Okay, in hope he believed, in hope he believed against hope that he should become the father of many nations as he was told. Good. All right. 24. But the words, it was, verse 23, but the words it was counted to him were not written for his sake alone, but for ours also. It was counted to us who believe in him who raised from the dead Jesus our Lord. Good. Does anybody see the word Father? Verse 12. So verse 12, he made him the father of the circumcised, not merely circumcised, but also walk in the footsteps that our father Abraham had before he was circumcised. 17. So I want you to, I told you this is going to be some challenging truths. Who are, according to Paul, the Israelites, the children of God? Some of us have been raised and taught, well, of course, the Jewish nation. And when the Jewish nation is converted, or when the Jewish nation, Christ will return. But I will tell you, Paul says, the children of Israel is not about that understanding of Abraham, our forefather, by blood. But rather, Paul is in essence saying that Abraham is our father, Gentiles and Jews alike. Do you think of Abraham as your father? Do you think of yourself as a child of God in the same way as someone who says, I'm Jewish by background? Now, I share this with you because this is not an easy, this is a complicated conversation, and we should probably spend more time on it. But where this starts is, he says, so what advantage did Abraham really have? And by the time it's over, we find out Abraham is considered righteous the same way everybody is. It's given to him. He doesn't deserve. This is a teaching that Jesus got himself in hot water in the Gospel of John when Jesus was conversing with his fellow Jews. And they said, well, Abraham's our father. And he says, no, Abraham is not your father. Do you remember who he says is their father? Satan. So if we start spending time with people who are Jewish by background, we have to recognize that people who are Jewish by background they are as loved by the Lord God as you are. And they are loved the same way, by the same standard, because of a Jew who was the sacrifice for the sins of the world. So when we talk with someone who is Jewish, what we want to find out is what is their understanding and their view of Jesus, a fellow Jew, Yahshua. And we could sit all day and try to parse out over the last 2,000 years, which has the most group? The Messianic Jews, the conservative Hasidic Jews that are still literally waiting for a personal Messiah, or those that are moderate Jews who view probably the people of Israel as possibly the fulfillment of the Messiah, or those that, I hate to use the word liberal, those that actually may not even take into consideration the Old Testament as being the words of God for them. So when you have conversations, and I have friends, I have those that have come into our family who have Jewish background, having a conversation that is not full of a lot of visceral, who gets in, who doesn't get in, who deserves to get in, who doesn't deserve to get in, is much more helpful to just start with, what do we all have in common? What we all have in common is that, according to Paul, we are all broken. And there are no advantages. Ultimately, salvation is the Lord's. And Paul uses this chapter to deal with a very specific issue. And so if you go with me, if you notice, it says, was he, what shall we say, did he gain according to the flesh? And then he picks up where he was left off in chapter 3. For if Abraham was justified by works, he has something to boast about, but not before God. And then he says, for what does the scripture say? Abraham believed, and it was counted to him as righteous. That word in the Greek language, it comes credited, is actually an accounting term. How many of you have an accounting background, more of a math experience? So if you have an accounting background, you understand that there is someone who credits you. You receive it. You're not the one, it's credited to you. And what Paul is basically saying is, Abraham was passive. It was credited to him as righteous by faith. And so therefore, continuing in verse 3, he goes through this whole argument about dues and payments and all of this. But what I want you to know is oftentimes people will say, and again, you're going to get into some of these conversations about, well, circumcision and all this. But the fact is, and I'm just going to read to this to you so you can hear what was very helpful to me years ago when I was first introduced to this. In Genesis chapter 15, that's where it says, Genesis chapter 15, verse 6. It says, Abraham believed the promise and was credited with righteousness. Okay? That's Genesis 15. And that's when he's given this promise that you're going to be the father of all nations. So how does Abraham deal with that? He deals with it just like you and I do. He says, this ain't going to work so well. And his wife is complicit, and she says, well, we got this, cute little, would you, maybe this is what God had in mind. Now, this should sound all familiar. God gives. We're not sure if we believe it. We're going to help God. But God credited him as righteous before he did that. Was Abraham still righteous when he was off having sex with Hagar? And the answer is yes. See, this is the challenge. We're either going to fall down on the side of works, or we're going to fall down on the side of faith. He was still righteous, even though he's having it in his head. He can solve God's dilemma. How do you get, this old lady can't do it. And this is what we live out. So my introduction to this was when I went, and Dr. Zimmerman, I was a freshman and taking New Testament, and he said, okay, here's the question I have for the class. Those of you that are Christians, you're all pre-seminary guys, so I'm going to assume you are. When you are in the midst of your pet sin, on a 1 to 10, 1 meaning God is really pissed. On a 5, he's unhappy. And a 10, he is smiling big at you. 1 to 10, what is he doing when you are sinning? Well, I said, it's got to be like 2, 3. And he said to the group, you really don't understand this, do you? Even when you are sinning, God is smiling because he is looking at you through his Son. When he looks at you, he sees Jesus. Now, this should prepare you. Because now when we get to chapter 6 and it says, well, if this is all true, then why don't we keep on sinning? So grace can abound all the more. If God's smiling on me, whether I'm, trying to take Hagar and figure this out, why not do it? It's a complete misunderstanding of God and his character and his law. And it starts with who doesn't belong. We all have our pet sins. We've all determined who the people that should be in and shouldn't be in. And so he goes on through here. He doesn't stop there. He pulls up David. And he quotes from Psalm 32. And he talks about David. This is David, folks. Is David righteous? According to Paul, he is. But he isn't righteous by what he does. He is righteous because of his relationship with the Lord in faith. And so this can be such an important, and I want you to talk through this together. Because I would tell you, churches are either going to be known for their morality, and by the way, oftentimes that's contextually defined, or they're going to be known for their Christ. Don't hear me as saying that if you're known for Christ, morality isn't important. And don't hear me as saying those churches that are known for morality think Jesus isn't important. But you will find, and we've got to go, you will find if a church is going to be about morality, whatever the morality is. I mean, I'm not kidding you. Whatever the morality is, they determine. They may use Jesus as the example to endorse their morality. Some of you have heard me. I watched it again through the football and World Series, the commercials. He gets us. Jesus is the example. All you have to do is go read up about this movement. This movement is, at its heart, saying Jesus is a good example for us to follow. And I want to just tell you right now, Jesus did not come here to be an example for you to follow. He is an example for you to follow, and doggone it, we should follow him. But that is not why Jesus came. If you think Jesus came that way, then you are really falling into the same issue that Paul's addressing. Jesus came here to make it possible for you to be righteous, period. And he is our righteousness. So you're going to undoubtedly have some fascinating conversations. I'm looking forward to hearing about them. Get into your groups, and we will see you back at 11:15. It's 10:32, so have at it. We'll see you in a bit. We'll give you, 10 minutes notice today. I've heard 5 minutes isn't enough. We need 10 minutes notice.